Hello, everyone, and welcome to Curriculum Conversations with Angela and
Steve.
How's everybody doing this week? We are going to start off with an overview of our week 2 materials, so I'll let Steve take it away.
Awesome. So for week 2 in my Ethics Studies 101 class, I have them do 4 short readings. One is Early Development of Race as an Ideology, as a Social Construct in Spain. And then I have 2 short readings to kind of give a background on North American indigenous communities. And then the last one is kind of closer look at British colonization processes, comparing those processes in Ireland, in Virginia, and in the New England colonies. Along with that, I have them watch one TED Talk. This kind of talks about, the question is asked, what explains the rise of humans? And so it's really talking about, social constructs and the ways in which these guide our behaviors and our social structures. And so they watch that. I actually, in my module overview, asked that they watch this first before getting into those readings to kind of get them thinking about these things. And then after they've done their readings, I asked that they watch a short video titled Frontera, which recounts the history of a 1680 Pueblo revolt against Spanish colonization, so that they can also see anti-colonial movement in this context of these early colonial projects. And then at the end of the week, they have a discussion post, and for module 2, I'm trying to get them basically to think about how they take notes. And so I give 2 options in the discussion post. One is they can choose one reading and one video and take their own personal notes and then upload them and share them to the rest of the class through the discussion post. Or the other option is that they do independent research on anything that's related to the content of the module, and then just upload the article or the website link to share that with their classmates, but also to give a kind of brief explanation as to why they chose to go and do extra research on this topic and why they chose that particular resource to share with their classmates.
Cool. So for week 2 of my lifespan developmental course, I had mentioned in our last video that I go from womb to tomb. So chapter 2 starts in the womb. We talk about prenatal development. We talk about the birth process, and then we talk about postpartum sort of physical changes, emotional changes, lifestyle changes. After I have them read the chapter, I have them listen to a podcast that I record, and it basically goes through the material, gives them more tangible examples. There are 3 parts. I try not to make each part too long, just so that they can keep their attention. I also have 3 assignments that I assign every single week. The first one is a mastery training assignment. This is through our publisher platform, and so they develop this for every chapter. The mastery training is essentially like online flashcards, where it'll present a term and then it'll ask students to recall what that term means. And it will keep doing this until the student has mastered that material, which is why they call it a mastery training. The great thing about mastery training is it uses distributed practice. So it forces students to learn a little bit, take a break, and then come back and do it again later, so that they're not cramming it all at the last minute. The second assignment that I have every week is a quiz. This quiz is just on the chapter reading, and it's open so that students can take it multiple times, and it will take the highest score. So those 2 assignments are really low stakes assignments, so that students have an ability to practice the material without feeling pressured, so that they can always get full credit on this as long as they're able to do it enough times where they have mastered the material and they can get the quiz questions right, because then they can go back and check what they got wrong and then get it right the following time. The third assignment is designed to ensure that they're listening to the podcast. So I give the prompt for the assignment in the podcast. So if they didn't listen, then they won't know what the assignment is. So for this week, the assignment is to talk about the pros and cons of in vitro fertilization, which is a big topic that we talk about in chapter 2. And so it's a discussion board. So students write their initial post. They're required to respond to 2 classmates after that. So that's what I do in my second week. So Steve, as I was listening to you talk about your week, what struck me is that you have a lot of these different readings and videos. And I think for myself as a student, I might struggle with understanding how everything is sort of integrated together. So is there something that you do to help with that?
Yeah, so I do give like an overview page, which is not just about here's what you have to do for the week, but also an attempt to kind of explain why it is we're doing what we're doing. I'll admit, looking back at this module, looking back at my overview page, it was very minimal, and which is different, right? Again, I'm adjusting from the in-person to this online. In person, I'm constantly explaining why we have this reading beyond just the content, like what it means for our understanding of how to think in this class. And then also, if this video seems completely disconnected, I make that connection. And so I would say that the overview is kind of meant to provide that context, make those connections. I would say that I probably didn't do that great of a job in Module 2. And so one thing I have noticed is that as the semester has gone by, I've actually gotten better at that. So I can definitely say that my module overview page covers a lot more in the last few modules than it did in the first few modules, just kind of looking through the class so far. So that has helped. And some of that has been with student feedback throughout the semester.
That's really great that you're able to take that feedback from students and then use it to improve their experience in the class. I think that that's a really important point to make, that we don't get it perfect the first go around, that we can incorporate some of that feedback and make our courses better. I think that that overview that you talk about is so important because it provides this sense of transparency, that there is a purpose for why we're doing these readings and how we're supposed to use those readings. And I think that a lot of students, they want that sense of purpose, like that they're not just, okay, I have to go in and I have to read this and I have to do this. It's more like, okay, well, there's a reason for it. It's not just to do it. It's not just for busy work. I hear that a lot from students. I don't want to do busy work, right?
Well, you know what's funny about that? I explained, like, me assigning you busy work is also giving me busy work. I got to grade it. So I'm not doing it just for no reason. And I'll be honest, I mean, this class, again, is a class that I have. We do have synchronous sessions. We have one Zoom session a week. And so I know that I'm able to make those connections a lot better when we're in the Zoom session. In that way, I can say that I feel like maybe I'm not doing as great a job on that in my completely asynchronous classes. And so again, I mean, that kind of requires me to type out more in those overviews for the asynchronous classes as well. But also the suggestion has been made that I create some small short videos that kind of help with that and kind of embed those into those pages of the module so that, they're constantly, one, hearing my voice, seeing my face, but also getting that explanation other than just text on a page.
Right. And I think that that's huge. That goes back to what we talked about last week with this building community, that they want to feel connected to you. You're their instructor. And so they want to be able to see you talk about this stuff or hear you talk about this stuff. So I know that we had talked about in the past sort of a fear that you and I both share when creating this sort of online content, like videos and other things, is issues of accessibility as well as copyright. These are things that I know that we've all learned more about going into the online context as we're getting more training in teaching online. And they're scary. Like, we could get sued if you don't make your material accessible, or like you could get sued if you use an image that is copyrighted and you didn't like give credit or you didn't pay for it. So I think that there is that fear and it's very real, which may stop some people from developing some of these more cool and flashy things in their online courses. Like, I decided to go the podcast route instead of the video route because I was afraid of having to create these videos with the embedded captioning and how long it would take me to do that, as well as, showing images on a PowerPoint that I'm talking over, that again, it'd be copyrighted and then I get in trouble for it. So for me, like, the podcast route was safer in terms of accessibility and copyright. The other thing that I like about the podcast is that students tell me that they can listen to it while they're driving to work or driving to school or something like that. I think that we all spend so much time staring at our computer screens that it's nice to have content where you can go for a walk and look at not your computer and still be getting the content. So, I sort of have that balance in there as well.
I think that's a great point. And you're so right. Other than just my inability to really handle technology, I did have the fear of seeming inauthentic because it's not my natural approach to teaching. But to your point, I mean, yes, some of this seems really overwhelming in terms of making sure that I'm covering all my bases with accessibility and copyright and all of those things. And so at the start of this online teaching, I mean, I just thought, okay, I'm going to try to kind of go a minimalist approach and not try to kind of do too much. And so, I mean, I think it's great that you're doing a podcast, and I agree. I mean, it is a good way to kind of take in the information, but be able to walk away from the computer. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the other thing that came up for me as I was reflecting on my course is the cost of the textbook. Textbooks are not cheap, and we know that students struggle sometimes with getting enough money to get access to the textbooks. And in thinking about making my classroom a more equitable space, textbooks are one of those places where I feel like there are certainly inequities there. And I really struggle with that every semester, because inevitably there are students every semester that come to me with an issue like that. And so I've been really curious about OER, open educational resources that are free and available to students. But I feel like I don't know enough faculty who use resources like that. And so I don't think that I have enough knowledge, or I don't feel like I have someone that I can go to ask for advice about that, which is again why I've been hesitant to sort of move forward with something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think considering what the cost to students are to get the materials just to be able to start the learning process, I think is really important. I do think that this movement towards OER is important. But like you, I mean, again, I was just an in class teacher, and so the online thing is new, and so even the idea of OER and what that all means and how to go about that is something still foreign to me. But I can say I think it also matters in terms of the disciplines, because in my field, the books that I require are, you can get them used for $20. Some, as cheap as under $10. And then I also like to provide a lot of supplemental readings that I've scanned and provide to students in that way. And so I can see where you feel conflicted with that. Here's this textbook. It should be, and it comes with so many other additional tools and resources, which I think are really important. I have to create all of my quizzes. I have to create all of these kind of supplemental resources, which when you use these publishers and these textbooks come with it. But I think there is something to be said about the cost of those and the accessibility to those because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are those pros and cons with using publisher materials. So after our conversation this week, I find myself feeling more frustrated and feeling like I'm bumping up against a lot of obstacles. I feel like after last week, I felt all like hopeful and excited. Going through my curriculum has been really great to reflect on these things, but I recognize that there are things that I feel like are bigger than me that I have a hard time navigating. So that's where I'm at this week.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that, it's only week 2 and we're already getting that feeling. And for me, and for me, which, we got 14 more weeks of this just for this one semester in this one class. But for me, this is really helping me, because I think I get so caught up in doing the next thing and all the other things that come up when you're working, that sometimes going back and reflecting is not something you make time for necessarily. And we're doing that very consciously. And I'm realizing there's a lot of things that I can do to better help my students and better kind of help them navigate my class, but also to understand the materials. I feel like that minimalist approach to try to not get in trouble for this or for that, or to try to overwhelm myself, I think has also left me with a sense that there's a lot more I can do to kind of make the class a better experience for my students.
That's great. And I think that one thing that came up when you were talking about that was to not try to do everything at once. I did it. I spent one semester where I recorded all these podcasts all in the same semester, and it was really hard. So learn from me and don't do it that way. Just do a little bit at a time. Steve and I are talking about a lot of different things that we can change in our classes, but I don't think that we're going to change all of that all at once. These are just ideas. These are just reflections, things that we could potentially try, maybe put on a to-do list for a future semester or over the summer when we have more time, because I think that we're all pressed for time, and making these significant changes to a course is hard and it will require time and effort. So give yourself a little grace that we don't have to do it all at once. But I think the fact that we're taking the time to think about these things and to have this conversation, I think is so valuable. And so I'm really glad that we're doing this.
I agree completely.
All right. So Meet us right back here for week 3, and we'll see you then.